Well, last July's deadly arson attack in Douma thrust the spotlight onto Israel's dark side, the growing threat posed by Jewish extremism. And last night, renewed attention as a wedding video surfaced showing the celebration of the murder of an 18-month-old Palestinian infant. Eli Hochenberg, diplomatic correspondent for the News Today, examines Israel's far-right past and present.
The Jewish people have always had many enemies, but history shows that none managed to cause as much harm as intra-Jewish conflicts, a seemingly never-ending fraternal war. On Wednesday night, a growing rift within modern Israeli society burst into the headlines and stayed there. This wedding footage, broadcast by Israel's Channel 10, shows right-wing extremists celebrating July's killing of the Palestinian Dawabshe family. Dozens of guests danced while waving knives and rifles. Others mock-stabbed a picture of 18-month-old Ali Dawabshe, who was murdered along with his parents in the arson attack in Douma, believed to be carried out by ultra-nationalist Jews. Judaism has a very long heritage of extremism. During the Roman Empire, the Jewish Sicarii were the zealots. The name derives from Latin and describes their use of daggers to attack Romans and their supporters. The Sicarii are best known for their mass suicide in Masada, 3 years after the destruction of the biblical temple in Jerusalem. The most influential extremist of modern times was Rabbi Meir Kahane, whose Koch movement was banned as a political party in Israel in 1988. Kahane himself was assassinated by a Muslim in Manhattan in November 1990. His radical vision, however, inspired others and outlived him.
I want to throw all the Arabs out of Israel. Out, out, out.
A great example is the Jewish underground, which killed multiple Arabs and plotted to assassinate Palestinian mayors and blow up the Dome of the Rock Mosque in Jerusalem's Flashpoint Temple Mount compound. In 1994, Baruch Goldstein killed 29 Palestinians at the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron. 1 year later, Yigal Amir assassinated then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. In the 21st century, Jewish radicalism has found its expression in so-called price tag attacks, namely carried out against Palestinians by young hardline settlers.
There's no room for forgiveness. This is my land. We have nothing to do with the Arabs here. They are welcome to go to France or Germany. I heard they're seeking for many Muslims there these days.
After decades of feeling marginalized, the Israeli right today controls the government. With this power comes great responsibility, not only to preach tolerance towards the Palestinians, but also to bridge the divide between right and left, as well as defining right from wrong.
Yes, and I'm joined now in the studio by Martin Sherman, founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
And Yossi Shein, head of Political Science Department at Tel Aviv University. Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, let's begin by one of the most recurring claims every time a video like this surfaces, like the one we saw last night at the wedding. People tend to say that this is not representative of the right wing in Israel, that this is a minority that does these things and behaves this way. Can this argument still be put forward now?
Of course. I think it's a marginal minority that has very little support in Israeli society, even amongst the establishment right. And in many ways, I think the whole debate on left and right in Israel is misleading, because what's happened is 3 different parameters have been collapsed into one in categorizing organizations or people as left and right. You have one axis of liberal conservative on socioeconomic matters. You have one axis on religious and secular on faith-based issues. And you have hawks and doves on security and foreign policy issues. Now, unfortunately, what's happened is that people who on the one end of one spectrum are automatically categorized as being on a particular edge of the other spectrum. And that's completely wrong. I think the entire categorization today of left and right has become distorted, because if you look at the Likud's policy today, their declared policy, whether you believe that they're sincere or not, it's almost indistinguishable from the same policy that Meretz was promoting in the 1980s. So is Likud left or right? Is Lieberman left or right, who suggesting a two-state solution and far-reaching territorial concessions. So I think the whole discussion of left and right is very, very problematic.
Yes, well, let's stay with the debate of tonight about this specific basically video that we saw yesterday. How much political influence does this group have, even though it may be a minority in numbers?
We have to make a point here. What you see is a very particular segment of what people call the Israeli right that basically collapses a religious extremist belief against the state and the system itself, trying to address the issue of the right of what they regard as Jewish right to the land of Israel with a theology which is completely against everything that the liberal democratic state believes in, and they want to undercut it. Sometimes they mobilize the state in their favor. Sometimes they act as revolutionaries in their own midst against those settlers, let's say, which are part of the establishment. And sometimes they cross lines and become criminals. Many of them are complete criminals, acting in a manner that is not even controlled by their parents, their teachers, and so on. The question you ask is a very important question. Are there a marginal group in Israel's society? How many of them, and to what extent they are threatening Israel? In my opinion, as opposed to my very close friend and colleague Martin Sherman, they are incredibly dangerous. They will do everything to undermine the system. Among them, you will find people who will be easily murdering the prime minister or whatever head of state. They will be the one who will not, I will say, shy away from using any means to establish and consolidate their views. And they also represent a certain generation that has no longer has this kind of like mentality of heeding to certain rabbis or authority or even parents. In that respect, they become very dangerous because the numbers are not marginal, and they are, in fact, penetrating all sorts of like pockets in the Israeli right, which oftentimes come to their defense, notwithstanding the danger that they pose to the Israeli right itself.
And let's talk about this danger some more and how Israeli security forces, the Shin Bet, can deal with this. Because a lot of people claim that the Shin Bet's dealing with this thing that's going on recently is far more lax than it would be when it would deal with Palestinians.
Well, I think, I was listening to the Prime Minister on the radio coming into the studio today, and he said something which was correct, but a great understatement. He said there's a huge difference between the scale of Arab terrorism and Jewish terrorism. And of course, he's right, but he's understating the case. You can call what you see amongst the Jewish radicals terror, and you can call what you see among Hezbollah, ISIS, and Hamas terror. It's like calling, you can have a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier bristling with the most advanced weapon systems and a 4-foot rubber dinghy, and you can say they're the same because they're both sailing vessels. But do you need the same methods? Do you need the same methods to contend with them? Of course you don't. And it's the same with what we're seeing now, the phenomenon of Jewish terrorism and this phenomenon of Arab terrorism. Arab terrorism is a completely different phenomena, backed by foreign powers, funded by millions of dollars, with international reach, with communication systems. Jewish terror is a small, isolated band that has got very little support amongst the Israeli establishment. They have no overseas finance, they have no overseas reach, they have no overseas support, at least no government support. So a completely different phenomena, and to expect that the state would need the same array of powers to deal with both of them, in my opinion, is ridiculous.
It is important to note, and Martin is correct, these terrorists, and they are terrorists, of course, are not like ISIS, and are not like Hezbollah, and are not like Hamas, or even, Palestinian terrorism that is we became accustomed to. And yet, the danger is immense, because they come as part of the Jewish population of the state, protected by it, nourished by it. And as a result of that, the state itself is under siege, not knowing what to do with them, how to treat them, oftentimes their issues are coupled with, let's say, Arab terrorism. And that gives them supposedly legitimacy to act in a certain fashion, or if not legitimacy, at least not putting all the onus of suppression that needs to be done. The Shabak itself, the Shin Bet, is puzzled by that because sometimes they don't know how much they should act against them and how much should they protect them, because they also protect them. All heads of the Shabak, notwithstanding whatever Martin says, all of them will tell you this is a cancer in the state. You have seen the movie by the 6 heads of the Shabak, and they interviewed. All of them agree, and it's not a matter of political opinion, that this group is incredibly dangerous. If you will speak to the heads of the settler movement, the official, they will tell you these people are undercutting us. That's what they tell me constantly. Tag Mechir and all these guys who are kind of like acting in with no boundaries and with tremendous terror. And yet, he's right. The scope of the terrorism is quite limited. We are shocked by it because we are the Jewish state and democratic state. We cannot stand this kind of, it is not, it's sort of like, it does not get the ideological glory and the support, as Martin suggests, by the state. Of course, the state is against it, and almost everybody against it. And nevertheless, it's dangerous because it's coming from within.
Well, let's finish with the scope of the terrorism. The Dawabshe case, the Abu Khdeir case. Wouldn't you say that despite this being a minority in numbers, it is getting extremely more and more dangerous?
Well, I think for the fact that you can only enumerate very few cases compared to the well over almost 30 deaths from Arab terrorism in the last 100 days.
How many do we need until something drastic must happen?
No, I'm not justifying this in any way. I think that those crimes should be prosecuted. I think the perpetrators should be apprehended.
As terrorists, though?
Well, I think I don't really know as terror, because it may be most of what is branded as Jewish terrorism is vandalism.
And the Abu Khdeir case, are they terrorists?
That's a murder. I'm not sure that the Abu Khdeir case, for instance, was motivated by political ideology. It might have just been vindictive revenge because of the kidnapping. The issue of Duma, I think we should wait until the jury comes back with a verdict, because as at the moment, despite being detained for nearly 3 weeks, the security forces have not been able to.
The terror is a daily occurrence in the West Bank.
Yes, and
it's a daily occurrence. It's not always the killing of people, but it's a terror. They terrorize the Palestinians, they terrorize them in their homes, they terrorize them with their all. But again, it is without the blessing of the state.
Yes.
The state is completely against it. The fact that they managed to hijack the state.
Martin Sherman said, the jury is still in. Yes. We have 2-minute break, and we'll be right back. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thanks.